All right, we are ready to rock. Okay. Good day, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, CEO of Media Ops, Editor in Chief, DevOps.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard, and welcome to a live webinar roundtable today. This is a special event roundtable. It is a special session of our bi-weekly video show called the SRE Show for Slightly Reliable Entertainment, or site reliability engineering, depending on your point of view. This is our first live roundtable. We've been doing the SRE show for a number of weeks now. I want to thank Noble 9 for sponsoring today's roundtable as well as our SRE show. The title of today's roundtable is SLOs, Enabling Smart Engineering Decisions. Before we jump into it and I introduce you to our Rockstar cast, let me Siri's on. Let me go over a little of our housekeeping here. We do use the Big Marker platform for these roundtables. And for many of you, it actually works really well. It's a browser-based interface, no plugins, no downloads, nothing like that. And for most of you, you're seeing us in your browser. And if you look to the right of your browser, again, for most of you, you'll see the Big Marker Communications panel. And you can see it's white, and then up at the top, it'll say chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. Two particular sections I want to make aware for you today. One is marked chat, and underneath chat, you'll see public and presenters, and private and Twitter, which we don't have activated. In the public chat is where you can communicate with everyone else who is attending today's roundtable, as well as the just everyone who's on. So it's not the way we ask questions of our panel. For that, we're going to use Q&A. I'm going to explain that in a moment. But if you just want to communicate and say hello, say where you're from, be involved in today's roundtable, you could use that public chat function right there. And I'm going to invite everyone listening, if you want to log on and type and say hello from where you are in the world, because the great thing about these things being online is we do get a global audience. So feel free to type in, say hello, and where you're from. Additionally, you could do private chat one-to-one with people. And if you know someone, and this is not a substitute for Tinder or anything, but if you want to, carry on a private presentation with people, feel free to do so. And you see, we've got people from New York and Eagle, Idaho. That's great. France, Bangalore, Dubai. That's what makes it really special. I want to now jump from chat to Q&A, though. So Q&A is where you can pose a question to our roundtable, and I will take them, not at the end. We're not saving time at the end. We will integrate these questions into the flow of the roundtable. So what's great about this is you, meaning our audience, you guys who are logged in here, you will drive this roundtable and where we're going to go and what we're going to talk about. We have a agenda and everything, an abstract, but it really is going to be up to you guys. We got, as to where we go on this. I'm really happy to see we got people from New Zealand. Hello to our Kiwis down there, and Amsterdam, and just all over the place. So thank you for joining us. Let me now introduce you to our amazing panel for today. So first of all, I want to introduce you to the host of the SRE show, my partner at DevOps Institute, Jane Grohl. Jane, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Grohl. I'm CEO of the DevOps Institute. I'm also one of the co-hosts of the SRE show. So really looking forward to today's roundtable with some amazing people and spending some time with my other co-host, Jeremy Cooper.
Absolutely. And they made it easy. Our next person to introduce you to is the co-host of the SRE show, Jeremy Cooper. Coop, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is Jeremy Cooper. I'm a solutions engineer at Noble Nine, and I'm also the co-host of the SRE show with Jane. I'm really excited to be here. I think we're in for a great conversation today. I've been involved with site reliability engineering before it was called site reliability engineering. So it's fun to talk about the way that things have developed and evolved and will continue to move forward.
Fantastic, and thanks for being here, Jeremy. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Alina Anderson. Alina?
Hey, my name is Alina. I'm a professional cat herder. I specialize in the SRE infrastructure space, and I also volunteer. I'm a co-organizer with DevOps Day Seattle, and yeah, this is my idea of fun.
Fantastic, and welcome, Alina. Continuing our Seattle theme, we have Jolene Kidney, right? Jolene, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Jolene Kidney. I'm a program manager at Getty Images. You may recognize Getty Images from news articles, and you see the little Getty Images tag under there that says that we provided that photo. So Getty is a provider of not only sports and entertainment and news, but also, just top quality stock images. So that's what I work for. So as you can imagine, having a very reliable digital platform that can get content quickly and get it out into people's hands is really important. So I've been the program manager for our site reliability initiative for the last 2 years, and it's been an incredible journey, and I look forward to sharing that with you.
Fantastic. Thank you, and welcome, Jolene. Next up, a person from across the pond today, Sal Kimmich, or is it Kimmich?
You got it. I mean, both work. Yeah.
Well, whatever works. I'll go with what you tell me, Sal. But why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right outside of London, but yes, originally from the US, you can probably tell. And yeah, so I am in the site reliability engineering space, kind of moving over from the machine learning DevOps space, which I like to say is generally DevOps on steroids. And I'm kind of interested in approaching SRE, systems level understanding, but, how do we build the right tools to get that inside of the mind of a single engineer so they can understand their jobs, right? That's what I care about. So I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here, Sal. Thank you so much. So today's roundtable revolves around service level objectives, SLOs. And, I'll confess, I first became aware of the term SLO probably within the last 6 months or so only. I wasn't aware of it before then, but it's really kind of taken the SRE world, at least by storm, if not the greater DevOps world. But I want to make sure we level set with our audience, sort of, what do we mean when we talk about SLOs? I think SLAs are something we're all familiar and, are comfortable with. And many people sometimes try to contrast an SLA to an SLO, and I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but it's a jumping off point. So who wants to kick it off here and talk about, when we say SLOs, what do we mean? If there's no volunteers, I'm gonna pick on Jane.
I knew he was going to pick on me anyhow. So
Yeah.
I'm going to take it from a much higher level,
Go.
given the fact that you mentioned SLAs. So, the concept of an SLA, or a service level agreement, over the past several years has taken on a lot of different definitions, right? It could be how a supplier responds in the event of an emergency or an outage or an incident. It could be the availability of a service. It could be the capacity of a service. But it became a very contractual, almost legal definition of what a service level agreement was, even within an organization. When it went kind of, group to group, it felt like you had to have two lawyers sitting across the table from each other just to negotiate what you were willing to agree with. And one of the things I love about the idea of a service level objective, right, is the objective for the service, right? How is that service going to perform, right? And it provides, I think, something that everybody who's involved in that service, regardless of whether they're a developer, whether they're infrastructure, whether they're what we call operations or support, everybody understands what the SLO is. And then the SLO can granulate in a couple of different ways. But it's a common understanding of how we want this service to perform, right? Without the lawyers, without the agreements, without all that other kind of, contractual or contextual things, from the highest level, I think it's really understanding how it's going to perform and then all the elements that are associated with it. So I would turn to the actual SREs for how SLOs are defined within your organization. Okay, come on. Somebody
Jeremy, you
volunteer.
want to go? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, I'm going to go. I've spent time with Jolene before, so I feel more comfortable asking her to start us.
So for us as an organization, SLOs was a new word. We actually a lot of times start off when we're launching SRE within a new group within our organization. We kind of do kind of an alphabet soup explanation. So we don't really have as many SLAs in our business, but we do have what we consider that the happy path for our customer. When they're coming to our site, they need to be able to search for content easily. Obviously, the site needs just to be up and available. But we, say that you need to search, you need to be able to download, you need to be able to pay for something if you want to. These are all the kinds of things that one expects as a customer to be able to do easily. And whether we like it or not, our e-commerce platforms out there, thank you, Amazon, are really setting the bar very high in terms of the mental expectation that anyone has when they're interacting with a site. And so when really you kind of say, like, even a step down from SLA, even if we don't have a legal agreement, if we're not necessarily providing a service, I think software as a service, definitely that becomes very important. But even for, just a digital platform of any kind, there are expectations in your mind. And so, just even think of the spin, right? You go, oh my gosh, I just clicked this button and it's spinning on me. That all of a sudden just becomes, something that a customer goes, what's wrong? Something's not right here. Like, we've lost our patience, right? So we don't anticipate that anymore. And so that objective really is understanding any of your sites or services and going, what would a customer expect when they come to interact with this site? And if it's all of a sudden not meeting that expectation, then you're creating sort of a customer dissatisfaction at that moment. And maybe they'll stick around, but maybe they won't. So I think that's the point of establishing those objectives, of knowing when that's happening. You want to know it as soon as you can so that you can do something about that.
Yeah, I think, so like the basic definition of SLOs, right? It's a percentage value. It has to be calculated. So you just want to make the statement that the hypothesis is that when something is true, it is a positive experience for your end user, latency reduced, the fact that they're able to do their transaction when they want to and the way they think they should, right? You want that to be available for a percentage of time that is possible, because the things that we build are not perfectly stable things. It's the premise of the field. But a thing that's kind of been bending my mind lately, I was having a discussion with one of my engineers, and he was like, yeah, but an SLO doesn't have to be technical. And I was like, it does. What do you mean? And he told me this story, and I think this is where, like, really understanding that it centers the business strategy and the business value of your system. He was working a while ago on a system where they were trying to reduce the latency of a customer service system. And when he left that company, right before they left that company, they switched one of the SLOs from being a technical definition to an SLO for literally, are people picking up the phones when they call our customer service? It has nothing to do with their website. It's literally the type of experience they want, and are we giving it to them in the time frame that they want it? So I think expanding it and understanding it's just placing business value and then having a yes or no read receipt when conditions are met for that business value proposition, which is why they can change too, right? They should always be moving around. That's just something I'm thinking about. Non-technical SLOs is something to play with.
I think SLOs can be non-technical. I think Jane was onto something when she started off, though. And, I've been dealing in the SLA world since 1997. Was in a managed infrastructure play in .com days, 98. And over time, they became very adversarial. There was definitely the customer relationship, right? But it was adversarial where if you didn't do this, I was going to get my money back, impose some sort of penalty, take you out to the woodshed, do something, right? Where and in certain relation, you never do a treaty with your friends, you do treaties with your enemies, right? And so in some relationships, you need an SLA, but I think Sal, you touched on it. A lot of the kinds of interactions we have, intercompany, even though there's a customer and a provider, you know, intercompany, you don't want to create that adversarial relationship, and I think that's an important element for SLOs, right? It's not creating an adversarial relationship. It's setting a level table of expected outcome, of expectations, right? And I think, to me, that's the important thing about SLOs. Jeremy, you want to chime in?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you guys brought up some really good points. And one of the things is it's setting a level of expectations, and you're documenting that. And now, you know what you're striving for, and the other people, whether they be customers internally or externally, know what they can expect from you. But one of the things that we didn't really harp on is the fact that no one expects perfection. And the beauty of the SLO and what it allows you to do is that once you have an SLO, you also have an error budget. So now you have an allocation of time where you're allowed to not be perfect. And the goal is to take advantage of that. And that's really how you get the culture to shift. It's one of the big selling points, is because now you can tell people you don't have to be perfect. And we fully understand that. And you can actually even leverage the amount of leeway that we give you to not be perfect, to deploy more features, or to be a little bit more risky, or to maybe reduce the spend that you have on infrastructure. So I think that's a really key thing about SLOs, is that it's formally putting out there, we're not perfect at all, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Hey, we've got our first Q&A from the audience, so let me throw it out because I think it's a good time to do it. Nag asked, can you throw some light on how to define smart SLOs and key actors to be part of this exercise?
I think.
Go ahead, Jane. Anyone?
No. I was going to say Alina.
Yeah.
We haven't heard from Alina yet, so.
So I really like this question because it was aligned with what I wanted to share. So I think about SLOs as really a product management superpower, because product it gives them a very clear, so they're a key actor as part of this exercise, because it gives them a very clear distinction between, hey, we've decided that, search latency 5 minutes for results to appear in search we're okay with that. And now, as long as we're meeting that, I can focus on new features and delivering new things to market. But if we're not hitting that agreement that we've decided is appropriate for my feature area or product based on talking with customer support, all the due diligence that you would do in order to do it, then you focus on, okay, is there tech debt? Like, what are the challenges we're facing with meeting this commitment? And so it really frees you from some of the challenges internally that you have, where maybe support opens an incident because, oh my gosh, this isn't behaving. And then product's like, well, I think that's expected behavior. And then engineering, so everyone has a different expectation around what is the commitment that we've made to the customer. And so I think product, really, when they internalize these, it frees them to be a lot more effective at driving prioritization.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think one of the challenges we've had historically in IT, and I always say I've been in IT probably a little longer than some of you, maybe just a little bit, but one of the challenges has always been this concept of business IT alignment or business IT integration, or trying to assign what's critical business service and how do you know, and who defines it, and all of that. And I think one of the real big benefits of SLOs is when you start to have the conversation right? To understand what the expectations are. To all of you who have said, we're not perfect, but also to understand which aspects of a service or which aspects of a product really are business critical, and which maybe, you can have a lower SLO on because they're not as critical. Right. And so it opens up a really amazing dialogue, and then it establishes metrics. I just want to say one more thing to Sal's point. It's really interesting when you said about numbers, because you're absolutely right. You can't measure something that doesn't have a number behind it. Right. But, numbers became a cocktail party status thing for a while with the IT executives, where it's like, I've got 5 nines. Well, I've only got 4 nines. And somehow it felt like that 9 conversation, somehow really there wasn't a lot of substance behind it, but it felt like, well, I've got more status than you because my team is better than yours because we could do 5 nines and you can't. Right. And so I think it diminishes all of that and starts to put real numbers behind what really matters. So talk among yourselves on that.
Yeah.
Sorry. I also wanted to next question. Another key actor here is executive sponsorship. So I will say it's really hard to move this needle and get people on board with establishing SLOs if you don't have perhaps your CTO really behind this whole thing. So I would say that is another key thing, is to find somebody in the executive layer who really is going to sponsor.
Yeah, always that top-down air cover.
And to follow on with that, the shortest, like if you're just looking for the very first place to start, in my experience, if you go to your status page, so status.organization.com, and figure out what your components are on that status page, just pick one. When do you post to that page publicly that there's an issue, and just pick one SLO for each of those items, and that can be a great starting point.
Fair enough. Let me ask you another question. So certainly SLOs are tied into culture, right? There's a cultural aspect of it. My question is it a chicken or the egg kind of questions? Do you need a certain culture in order to institute and be successful with SLOs, or does instituting successful SLOs create that culture or foster that culture, right? So which comes first here, if you will? Sal, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 things. Well, one, I think all SLOs are fundamentally neutral, right? They're just proxies, metrics.
Yep.
And so you should be pretty comfortable, even if you have a good one, being willing to change it and test out something else, right? There's always a new optimal. But yeah, I had a really interesting discussion a couple of weeks ago with some SREs, and really it got down to the point where it's a chicken and egg problem, or a cart and the horse problem, or the horse is monitoring, right? Nobody sees the value in how this applies to your system until you start doing some basic monitoring of your system. Typically, that's kind of the first step to strong buy-in. But alternatively, the culture around it, really, the way that I think about it, and I have conversations, with the engineers and with technical leadership and C-suite, all these different types. At the end of the day, if you can start to get them to see, and it literally is surfacing, visualizing, understanding in what way and in what level of stakeholdership they have around seeing a system, then they get it. If it means that if it means that a C-suite engineer is going to have, approximately 200 less meetings in a year to deal with serious incidents, right? Immediately they understand that's my stakeholder value. And if I have this kind of observability, that's my trade-off, that's my win. So I think it's a really, right, this false adversarialship of having technical leadership and having engineers, right? The whole point of DevOps is that we're kind of evolving as a team out of that being a thing. Now engineers and the culture, it's sort of embedding and growing together, I think. But I'm also incredibly optimistic, and I also encounter people all the time. They're just like, SRE is never going to work where I'm at, and I'm just like, just try, just give it a shot, right?
Start small, just a few things. Yeah, I will say that certainly culture shift and change management is is key here. I mean, don't just expect all of this to fall in line and everybody to see the loveliness. So you have to do a little bit of, shining the light on things or asking people to just dip their toe in the water and then utilize those to sort of kind of say, see what we've gained here. And so, yes, as an engineer, right? I hear this all the time. I don't want to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm all fuzzy. I hate this. I'm up for from 2 to 6 solving the problem. Like that is the engineers hate that. Like we don't want, nobody likes that. Right. And so I think, it's not that having these SLOs and some sort of alerting on, when you've kind of, started to burn through your budget at a fast rate, like that can seems scary, I think, sometimes as an engineer, because great, now you're going to monitor one more thing that's going to wake me up at 2 in the morning. But I think what we've seen, especially it takes a little fine tuning, but what we've seen is, and this is important to start calling out these wins, is that things tend to happen more often based on work being done during the day that somehow impacts your availability reliability, right? Like we've made a change that, oops, accidentally caused some sort of issue. And that means you can start picking those things up instead of at 2 in the morning. You can start picking those things up a lot sooner. And so I think, that's what the important piece is that putting this into the engineer's hands, making sure that they have visibility into when that error budget is burning down at a fast rate, that they can go look when they're not bleary-eyed at 2 in the morning, right? They can go take a look at that and say, like, is this something I should be concerned about? Is this not something I should be concerned about? And I think that's a huge win when you can start pointing that out.
Exactly. I wanted to piggyback on that. Just the fact that it gives you a view, since you're talking about user experience, customer experience. Now, if your monitoring stack, if you have a cluster go down, you're going to get a critical alert. But from an SLO standpoint, if things fail over to the secondary cluster, their users aren't impacted. So now you have visibility into, okay, do we need to wake up at 2 in the morning to fix this? Or have our systems worked as intended? And this can be resolved at 8 a.m. after I have my coffee when I'm fully awake. And I think that's a great value. And it goes to the story that you were telling of not having to wake people up at 2 a.m. for something that isn't actually impacting your customers.
Yeah, and I think, just to feed on that, I think that's really important. I think there are some people that operate on leaps of faith, and there are some people that operate on proof of concept, right? And so I think it's identifying those that can be the change agents, that have the openness, the willingness to experiment, to try, particularly, again, in a very siloed organization where monitoring was a whole separate organization far away from us. And that's why you might have gotten awakened at 2 o'clock in the morning. And now we're trying to create this very collaborative culture where we're saying, okay, we're all accountable for this, which means if you make a change in the middle of the day, then you need to test that so that we're all accountable for the SLO. So I do think you find the change agents who can develop the proof of concept, and then the culture can evolve from there. But it is breaking down, they say you have to unlearn before you can relearn. It is breaking down some of those walls and not putting the expectation of you're going to be awakened at 2 o'clock in the morning, or your workload just got, harder and you feel like you're doing somebody else's job, or, it's really kind of creating that environment where people feel that they're gaining from this. And again, those change agents are so essential. And yes, executives are change agents, but they can mandate it, but they can't change the way people think or the way people behave, right? So you need those inside change agents in order to make that happen, I think.
Yeah.
Alan, and you mentioned, you were asking about SLOs as a culture shift. And the way I think about this is we actually already have a kind of silent SLOs. This is just formalizing and making it visible within the organization. Like as an example, if you have a challenge with email deliverability, and support is probably already very well aware that, 50% of password reset emails don't get delivered. But once you start measuring it and you have it on a dashboard or have it in a visible, now everyone can be on the same page and actually drive engineering and product to prioritize work to fix that. And so I think sometimes it's not so much a, we haven't done this at all and we need to do this brand new thing. It's formalizing and making your system's behavior visible and able for everyone to align on it.
I don't disagree with that. But I think it was Sal brought up something earlier that, when we talk about SLOs, yes, it's very important to the SRE culture, the SRE, day to day. But SLOs really transcend that, right? You really can have SLOs all through an organization, both internally as well as externally facing, right? And so I don't want our audience to just, it's an SRE thing. These SLOs are good. We've got another question from the audience, though, if it's okay. And by the way, we love questions from the audience, so please keep them coming, folks. Ajoy asks, so SLO should be a target value or range of values for a service level that could be measured by an SL indicator. Of course, KPIs got to be part of it, correct? And that's another one of these relationships that I wonder about when I hear about SLOs is how do they measure up, or how do I work your KPIs into your SLOs without having too many acronyms? Who wants to kick us off on that, and then the rest of the panel feel free.
I'll take it. We're getting into semantics and the acronym jumble here, because SLIs and KPIs are essentially the same. It's just service level objectives with the S instead of the K. But so basically you're taking a metric value that you feel is very critical to the service that you're talking about, and then you're measuring that. So that metric can be called an SLI, it can be called a KPI, it can be called the most important metric. But you're taking that metric and then you're looking at the reliability of that particular metric over time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Fair. Anybody else? Vijay, actually, his question actually kind of follows into it. And he says, as a software services provider, we normally define process indicators, KPIs, operation level objectives, OLOs, SLO objectives, and SLAs. Generally, we define the norms with tighter control of an OLO, less, more than an SLO. And SLO, I guess, I always have a problem with less than, greater than. SLO greater than SLAs. KPIs are generally SLI, I think. He's new to SRE, but generally the above terminologies we use as per ITIL. And Jane, I know you're an ITIL expert. Are these not similar when we talk in the worlds of SRE? Jane, I got to ask you to kick this one off.
I know. So for those of you who don't know, I spent a fairly long time in the ITIL ITSM space. So I have probably a little bit more familiarity of OLAs versus SLAs versus KPIs and all of that. So in ITIL, quick ITIL lesson, in ITIL, you had an OLA. In this case, he defines it as an OLO, which was an internal service level agreement. So if you were committing to something with your customer, you'd also have to have an agreement internally between different groups so that you could underpin or support the SLAs. And so, again, sometimes they were very informal, sometimes they were very formal. Again, over time, they kind of lost their meaning, which was sad, because you did need that kind of internal conversation to say, look, if we're going to agree to this level of reliability, then, infrastructure or developers or security or whoever needs to also make a commitment there. And it may have been at the component level, at the application level, or whatever. And then that would roll up into what they called service level requirements, which were just before you got the document out and asked for signatures. Right. So again, the spirit is there. To Jeremy's point, we can we could try to look at this from a couple of different lenses. But, by its own admission, Google says that SRE is its approach to service management. So whether you're using ITIL or SRE, the difference I think with SLOs is that they are a shared responsibility across the entire organization. So, the topic today is effective decision making. So instead of having to have all these different stages aiming towards getting to an SLA, which is really the agreement part, right? The signature part of it. I like the idea of an SLO being more organic, right? Being something that, as Sal said, is dynamic and can shift as needed, right, based on what the current situation is. Whereas in the ITIL state, it was like, okay, every year we're going to look at this and we're going to review it and we'll see if it's still appropriate. It felt a little bit more complex than what we're talking about with SRE. SRE, one of the things I love about decision making is if we're thinking of doing something or not doing something, we could use the SLOs as kind of our heartbeat, right? Will this increase the health? Will it have a negative impact or a positive impact? And the conversation there can really help enable some great decision making based on everybody's awareness of the SLOs that we're trying to meet. And if there are consequences, which I think, kind of is a whole separate question, if there are consequences, everybody is going to take the remediation steps to overcome whatever was happening. That didn't happen in the OLA, SLR, SLA, because once they were agreed to, they were kind of fixed and everybody kind of did their own thing. Or I think in the SRE approach, it becomes much more communal. That, again, I hope that didn't kind of distract us, but I think that's what we're looking at is let's use this as an enabler of really good decision making.
No,
Yeah,
that was a perfect way of summing it up, because now that you have that error budget and you don't want to use it up and you're trying to protect your SLO, that's what everyone's working towards. It sort of gives a great context for everyone in IT and even the business to now talk about and leverage to make decisions about what sort of deployments they make, or if you're a project manager, like, can we move forward with making this new feature deployment? Are we on track to not violate the error budget? And then also in regards to reliability, it's like, okay, what kind of service have we been giving our users? Do we need to work on giving them better reliability? Now you have the metrics for that, and it's in a very simple format that everyone can understand, the business, the C-level, and even the IT department. So SLOs are definitely a key to helping make more effective and informed decisions.
And I like you use the word we, right? Can we do this? Not can I do it or can my team do this? Can we do this? There's a really good sense of we.
Yeah.
I agree with the we part of it. Let me just play devil's advocate a little bit, though. One of the things that I think a lot of people found refreshing early on in DevOps was that it wasn't so rule bound as ITIL, right? There wasn't all of these kinds of things like that. It was more of, hey, it's more natural. Let's let it happen, let it go, let it flow, to quote Dave Mason, right? And so now when I hear us getting into the SLO, KPI, SLA, and I'm thinking, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, keeping my music thing. Do we need to be careful of that? Alina, I see you smiling. Let's hear you.
Yes, I think it's can be very similar to the priority versus urgency versus severity circular discussion that you can spend hours and hours debating. I think you can get really far with just a good enough set, just starting with a good enough set of things and iterating from there.
Agreed. Anybody else?
Well, I mean, in part, right? I am relatively new to SRE as, being the base of my practice. But for me, I just can't see the complexity of, the systems that I was working on 10 years ago and the systems that I'm working on now. And it's only, I can go one or two steps in a company's architecture before I hit open source, right? At best. So I think when we're recognizing the responsibility and the ownership of the SLOs that we're trying to approach these days, right, I think this ties really good into the question of like what about monolith applications? It's kind of like, it's a great test case, but it's not where SRE really, really shines, right? Making sure that I understand the dependencies, and when that dependency hits the real world, that's, that helps me to understand my risk factors there. Because I could have the best engineers in the universe, but if I'm, hitting endpoints that I don't have any control over and that are subject to change, having that level of observance of the system really, really makes a difference, I think.
I don't disagree there. Anyone else?
I was just going to say around SLOs, I just fully support the service ownership that you're talking about. And that was kind of, I feel like that move from ITIL into SRE is really about understanding what you think your service should be providing to your customer, and measuring that and saying like, I want to keep it at this particular level. However, I will also say that sometimes it's not easy to know what that benchmark should be, especially in latency, right? And so I think, setting that SLO, you have to realize that's gonna take some time to figure out what's the right, like, it's very costly to try to be as close to perfect as you can. So that's not necessarily the right target, but it's also not the right target to say, well, let's just see what we kind of do today and try to hold the line, because maybe what you're doing today isn't quite right. So I think, understanding whether your SLOs are at the right levels can take some time to figure out. And I will make a plug for postmortems, in that we have a driver within our business that says if we have a high urgency issue that's reported by a customer or that's detected by some sort of proxy that we are not capturing with an SLO, we at least need to ask the question, should we? Right? So is your SLO really capturing the things that are impacting your customers? And if you're getting to that postmortem process and feeling like the answer is no, that might be a good place to figure out, is our SLO at the right level? Did we not detect it soon enough? Did we not detect it before a customer had a chance to contact us, or we got to see something? Or do we have a complete blind spot there altogether? How many customers is this impacting, right? And so I think that's the kind of idea of that SLO, is to use that feedback loop process to get to the right place, whether it's to ratchet it up or ratchet it down.
And Alan, to your question, I think your question's a really good one, because the risk of complexity or the risk of bureaucracy is always there. It's always hovering over you, right? Humans, even though we want to be self-regulating, even though we want to be self-organizing, we want to be empowered with error budgets, we have not been trained that way, right? And so it's scary. And so what ends up happening, I'll go back to ITIL. ITIL was never intended to be bureaucratic by its very nature, right? But unfortunately, once it was put into practice, it was really almost easy for it to evolve into a much more governance-driven, rules-driven, complex type of environment. And the downside of that is that, it is now perceived to be kind of an outdated, in many ways, a process framework, where you look at SRE, which is intended to be much more organic. The risk of SRE and SLOs kind of evolving in that same path is absolutely there, as long as people take the initiative and executives empower, right, the teams to be able to spend their error budget comfortably, to know when they're about to breach it, to have the conversations on SLOs, and for the individual to feel safe being able to operate in this way. And so I think there is a risk that, that this could take a very, very similar path. And again, I hate saying that, something that was intended to be really good guidance like ITIL, and there's other frameworks, pick Agile, pick, any of the above, where they've evolved into straight away from what the original intent was. And Lord willing, I hope SRE doesn't follow that path.
Lord willing, for sure. Guys, I got another question here from the audience that I want to throw out at you, and this comes from Sumant. He wants to know, what about monolithic applications? What are better ways to define SLOs for them? Right? And we sometimes, I think we tend to just ignore monolithic applications because they're not one of the cool kids on the block. And I hate that, but it's the way we are. So what about monolithic applications? Can we define SLOs for them, and will it help?
I would definitely say that you can define SLOs for them. It's really about what kind of monitoring you're able to put in place for that monolithic application. Some of them, it may be leaning towards strings that you see in logs a little bit more, like how many times are you seeing this 500 error in the logs so that you know that you're getting a failure, as opposed to where in a microservice world, it might be an API call timing out or something like that. Also, with the monolithic applications, they tend to have a few components in them. It's not just one single app. It might be like an app and then it has an associated database, and but within that monolithic application, there are things that you should be able to measure with your monitoring tools that you can use as SLIs, and then thus you would be able to have SLOs for them. And you could also do synthetic monitoring. If there's a front end to that monolithic application, then you could have a synthetic tool simulating a user going through it, and then you could have SLOs for the response times or whatever on your scripted synthetic action. So yeah, there are definitely ways you could do it, and if it's used by other people internally or externally, there should be SLOs for it.
Agreed. Anybody else thoughts on that?
I think what I've seen with the monolithic piece, one challenge can be organizational ownership, because no one team necessarily owns the monolith per se, and so thinking about, do you have a mechanism for tagging code owners, or do you have a way so that you can assign and delegate remediation work if something needs to happen? Because it's typically not scalable to have like one little SRE team that's trying to go run around and fix the entire code base. So figuring out a mechanism, it can be very powerful.
Yep. If no one has anything else on this topic, NAG has asked another question, and that it's not necessarily specific to SLOs, but to SLEs. From definition perspective, site reliability engineer requires a combination of development and operation skills, but non-functional testing community, performance testing, is also embracing SRE. Can you share your experiences on the involvement of non-functional testers or performance testers as part of the SRE function? Coop, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask if you have any thoughts on that to kick it off. It's a tough one.
Sure. I mean, I definitely think that there is a place for the performance testing within the site reliability. Like if you're not doing a load test and seeing how your SLOs perform during that load test, then you're missing out. I think that the performance testing is critical because they're doing things that real users would do. So it's another way of doing synthetics on your application, and you want to see what it actually, in some ways, it can expose SLIs for you. Like if your performance testers are doing things and your application breaks in a certain way or has latency in a certain area, now you can go back and look at the application, see what was going on, and you've probably exposed a new SLI that you might want to implement an SLO for. So testing is important. I mean, SLOs are great for production, but you want to run through things in your non-prod environment, in your test environment, to see what your SLIs are and to also see how things are performing before you go into production. So I think that testing is very critical, and it helps you discover your SLOs earlier on. The earlier you have SLOs in place, the better.
Excellent, Jeremy. Anybody else thoughts, comments on that?
I've seen one area of partnership between the performance testing team, SRE team, partnering on like chaos engineering events or game days, and also kind of co-presenting for lunch and learns to help development teams understand what it looks like to, have a pipeline with automated testing to get to production, and sort of increasing that operational IQ within the organization. I think there's a lot of synergy between those two groups.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, and of course I'm super biased because I'm dealing with a site reliability product and a chaos engineering product. But like, I mean, there's two ways that you can think about it, right? There's developing resilience through testing, right? Those are those game days. That's the chaos engineering. But there's also the other way, right? Can I use those in combination where, like, can I block off certain forms of like gremlin or chaos engineering blowouts? Can I block those off when I'm at like 10% left in my error budget, right? Thinking about it that way, like, how do we explore and understand our systems so that we can be maximally experimenting with them while not closing off our user activity, right? That like pre and post production environment, right? Can we be dealing with this? Like, I think even that sort of perception, right, as we're moving into a more continuous delivery way of thinking, lets us consider that. They're two sides of the same coin, really.
Agreed. I will tell you, well, first of all, I have to do a little housekeeping. I neglected to mention at the beginning of the show, at all of these roundtables, we do give out 4 Amazon gift cards to people who are attending, not on the panel. But so our 4 Amazon winners for today are Anna M., Orla S., Michael T., and Sean F. And our media ops team will be reaching out to you and sending those gift cards. They are electronic, so you would get them in the mail. But so that's that. But I'm listening to that question coming in on testing. I'm reminded of when I first launched DevOps.com, and there were some folks in the testing space running around Chicken Little that DevOps would be the end of testing. They'd no longer have a job. They were going to be obsolete. And now we see, well, how is SLOs going to affect? I don't think testing ever goes away, right? And not just testing, but so many of the functions within the way we do our technology stack today. And of course, they'll figure out ways to work together to be more efficient. But I don't think testing and performance testing folks need to look with sort of a wary eye at SREs. I think there's plenty of places for them to collaborate together to make a more efficient and better application delivery and functionality to end users. So I would just say that those kinds of things do work out. Guys, we're coming up on, we only got maybe 4 minutes left here. I wanted to give you each a chance to sort of sum it up. And Jane and Jeremy, I'm going to save you two for last. But Alina, do you want to just kind of sum up some of your thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, I think especially as a technical program manager, and I'm sure Jolene has a similar experience, where having someone whose charter is to beat the drum and really drive some of these initiatives throughout the organization, and it can be anyone, but I think really makes a difference. And it can be difficult to lift some of these changes alone. And so it's building the community around it and having someone who's just doggedly after it day in and day out.
Fair. Sal, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just exciting to see SRE really picking up more broadly. And, again, right, it's people are calling it DevOps 2.0 as well, right? It's just another way of thinking about solving problems collectively well. Yeah, honestly, I think sort of that culture perspective is the discussion that, I mean, I was happy to come and talk about it, but I think it's the one that's going to be ongoing. And I think, the next 5-10 years is really, we're going to see something new and interesting come out of working in this way. And I don't think we know entirely what that looks like. But for anyone, that's on this, that like, if your organization hasn't started yet, it sounds so much more intimidating than it is to actually do in practice. Like, there's so many free telemetry tools. Give yourself 2 hours on an afternoon, see what you can set up 1 or 2 indicators. That's it, right? That's, Nike says just do it, and that's probably what you should do, right? If you get it in your own system, I think you're going to see the utility right away. That's, again, I get on all these calls and I say, hey, just go give it a try, right? You don't have to be Google to get this right. So
You're right. Jolene, how about you?
Yeah, I will say that it can be intimidating to look at SRE as Google does it, and I'm very appreciative for them setting the bar, but there's a lot more content out there and the different ways that other people are doing SRE. And I can tell you that at Getty, we have a teeny tiny little SRE team, and it's more of our SRE enablement team is what I will say. And what we do is we enable our engineering partners who, for us, we're in the cloud primarily. And we enable them to say, this is how you can start to define what your services should do and how they should be performing. And it's yours to own. We are providing you this ability to be closer to what the customer's experience is for what you build and support. And so for that, I think that when coming back to the topic of this conversation, it has been that SRE enablement team, our primary focus has been what we call our stakeholders are our partner engineers. So we want to enable the engineers to see what's going on and to be able to be alerted if something is not going quite right and be able to make the right decisions at the right time, removing sort of that top-down, shouldn't I worry about this thing, right? And that's what it's about. It's about enabling, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. So to Sal's point, experiment, see what you can do, get your foot in the door.
Very good. Jeremy, why don't you give us your final thoughts here?
First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to say that SLOs can really help people make good business decisions. And one of the things we didn't touch on, but I want to call out, is SLOs aren't here to replace monitoring. Site reliability engineering isn't here to replace monitoring. It's here to work with it and enhance it. There's a lot of ways of doing it. It doesn't have to look the same at every company. To Jolene's point, don't read what Google did and say, that's exactly what we have to do. It can look a lot of different ways. And, if you're interested in it, then I think you should explore, find some more information out about it. Jane and I actually have a show, the SRE show. Feel free to come check us out on there. We recently, Noble 9, the company that I'm with, we recently sponsored SLO Conf. If you go to YouTube and look up SLO Conf, there are a ton of videos from actual people practicing site reliability in the marketplace, and you can learn from their experiences. So I think that would also be really useful. But thank you guys for coming today.
Absolutely. Jane, you've got the last word. As I just figured out, I forgot to put my light on. Jane, you've got the last word. Better late than never.
So the last word is human, right? So, some people are, we look at SRE as a very technical discipline, and certainly there's, when we're working with engineers, obviously we're looking at technologies, but everything we've talked about today, particularly the decision-making part of it, is human. We talk about customer experience, we talk about collaboration, we talk about decision-making, we talk about enablement, right? I love that word. Those are all human words, right? Those are all human considerations. And so, while there's a lot of really great technology and there's a lot of ways to automate what we're doing, we very much need to look at this from the human experience and not forget why we're doing what we're doing and who our real customer is. It's not the technology. So I think as we go forward and we talk more about it, particularly on the SRE show, we really want to bring in the human side of it. And Alan, of course, DevOps Institute, our mission is to advance the humans of DevOps. But I think particularly looking at the experience, and some of the things we talked about today, if you come away with anything, think about it from a very, very human to human perspective, because that's what we're trying to enable.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Sal, Alina, Jolene, Jeremy, and Jane for being on our roundtable today. Thank you to everyone who, from all over the world, as you've proven, who joined us today with this. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry you weren't able to join us live and ask questions of the audience. Comments are still coming in and thoughts, and we appreciate them. Do catch the SRE show. It is every other week. It plays on TechStrong TV on our 3 times a week content, but it's also available on demand at digitalanarchist.com, as well as OTT on Apple TV, Amazon, and Roku through the DevOps.com app. But for now, that's going to wrap it. Folks, thank you so much for joining with us and having this great conversation. This is Alan Schimmel from Media Ops. We'll see you soon on another webinar or event or whenever. Hopefully a conference in person soon. We'll see how it goes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.